Shining Resonance Refrain is an interesting game, a veritable cornucopia of things it does well and things it does not well. For starters, Shining Resonance Refrain is the current generation port and HD re-release of the PS3 original that never saw release in the West. The original game saw a number of criticisms on release, and many of them will carry through to this version as well. But one criticism that won't be carried over is the devilish and dastardly DLC practices previously employed. Shining Resonance Refrain includes all 150 DLC from the original for free. Thankfully, this means this version, as opposed to the original, will not ask you for microtransactions to continue playing after losing a battle. Retrying is now free, as it always should have been, so in this regard, this is the definitive version of the game. It doesn't take long to see what's new in this version over the original, and the first thing of course is the gameplay modes. Before even starting the game, you're presented an option as to how you want to play through the story, in original mode or in refrain mode. If you intend only one playthrough, just start on refrain mode. The differences between the two modes are anything but subtle, though the general story is the same in each. Refrain mode is essentially just original mode but with extra characters. These extra characters invite a lot of continuity issues, but so long as you can keep in mind what does and does not belong in original mode, it will be very easy to keep scope of the story properly. So since we're on the story, let's talk about it. It begins with a large lore dump of the land, outlining a kind of Lord of the Rings backstory involving pacts between dragons and men and war between kingdoms. Though some victories are won, it ultimately culminates in a sort of stalemate. Our main character Yuma is the possessor of a unique dragon known as the Shining Dragon. Against his desires, he ends up being pulled into the conflict and made to fight on behalf of the king and his kingdom. While he travels with a group of companions, he finds himself caught up in wars of territory and having to defend himself from vagabonds seeking only to hunt and kill dragons. The setup is decent but slow. Around chapter 5 I found the story started to get interesting, but the story itself is only 8 chapters, and by chapter 5 it did feel a little too late for me to care as much as I would like. For the most part, it's a pretty generic anime affair focused on cute girls and edgy boys.
See, here's the thing. We've been talking it up a bunch, but if the Shining Dragon turns out to be a weakling, I might end up breaking it by accident.
And I mean, the scenario writing is done by Edgeworks Inc., so I guess that explains it. More time will be spent on developing optional character relationships between your cast members, male and female, than will be spent progressing the actual plot across this 30 to 35 hour investment. But even these character developments suffer from being overly generic or predictable. They can be enjoyable and funny, but it's definitely nothing you haven't seen before. They at least offer a bit more than the majority of the game's side quests, though. Side quests are largely comprised of fetch quests or slay X amount of enemy quests with no depth and hardly any purpose. There's not really much variety beyond this, and for the most part, after you do about 20 of them, you'll see them beginning to repeat, often with a required number of kills or finds jacked up a bit higher than it was before. Making specific trips out of the central hub just to handle side quests isn't exactly rewarding, but I would recommend collecting every side quest you see, as most will complete themselves naturally as you play. There's also optional dungeons called grimoires. These offer a great way to net good loot and grind without too much tedium. You also get a small degree of control over what spawns in the grimoires, which can help you get a few side quests out of your quest log to net even more loot in addition to what the dungeon offers. So the story is kinda slow at the beginning, side quests are just filler, and characters leave a bit to be desired. Yet at the start of this video, I did say that this game does some things well. So let's take a look at what it does best, and get into the combat. First off, being that this is a party-based action RPG, a lot of people compare this to a Tales of game, and to an extent that makes sense, but it definitely feels as though mechanically, there are some big differing factors. You can bring 4 people into battle at a time, and who you control is up to you. Everybody controls different, so it shouldn't be too hard to find something that matches your playstyle. Though at times, certain characters will be forced into your party. Characters not used in combat do not gain experience. This led to a massive grind wall for me in the late game chapters. Though, there is a way to get around this if you find the right things to equip. But it would be generous to say that the right things to equip aren't made hard to find. The game pretty much goes out of its way to hide such items. If I didn't go out looking for tips on how to grind faster, I wouldn't even know about them. By the point I needed them, it was far too late. But I digress. Let's look at the controls, starting with the basics first. Circle, X, and square are your basic attack, dash, and block, respectively. You can only attack so long as you have action points remaining, as represented by the elliptical meter surrounding your character. It's best to treat this as a stamina bar, and it replenishes quickly on its own. Basic attacks won't do much damage at first. Before they can, you'll need to break the enemy's defenses by using break attacks. These are mapped to the triangle button. Additionally, you also have force abilities. You'll get several of these as the game progresses and you level up, but you can only keep 4 equipped at a time. These are mapped to an L1 submenu and do not require action points to cast, but they do cost MP. MP, unlike AP, does not replenish naturally over time. Instead, every attack adds a little bit back, or it can be restored manually by using items in battle. At this point, you can see the basic feedback loop of combat, but we haven't quite hit the interesting parts yet. The vast majority of your team members use weapons known as harmonics, which are musical weapons forged by the dragons from their own bodies. You can't buy new weapons or armor throughout the game. You just have your harmonics. Harmonics at the very least can be upgraded and customized in interesting ways, so you still retain some degree of control over your build. As you battle with your harmonics, you charge a meter known as the BPM, the Battle Performance Meter. When you charge up at least 1 bar, your teammates perform the Battle Anthem of the Noble Dragoneers, otherwise known as Band. Depending on what song is being played and who is fronting the band, your teammates will receive various buffs for the duration of the song. Other buffs can be obtained by resonating with your teammates. These buffs and the frequency to which they occur is based off the titles given to your characters in the Bond diagram menu. And lastly, we have the big gimmick of this game's battle system, the Dragon Shift. I mentioned earlier that Yuma, our main character, possesses the power of a dragon. For simplicity's sake, consider this dragon a spirit that lives within him and takes over his body when called upon. At nearly any given time in battle, you can hit L1 and R1 at the same time to turn Yuma into the Shining Dragon. In dragon form, circle and triangle become basic attacks. X becomes a dash attack, and square becomes a backstep, which also has an attack to go along with it. This dragon can turn the tide of battle quickly and deal a lot of damage, but it comes at a cost. Being in dragon form causes MP to drain constantly. If your MP dips too low during combat, then the dragon will turn rogue and turn on your other team members, and you'll find yourself in contest with a new powerful enemy and a reduced team size to take them on with. So this combat system I thought was actually really cool and a lot of fun, but it does have a bit of a fatal flaw. This problem doesn't reveal itself right away, but it gets worse and worse as the game goes along. Shining Resonance Refrain suffers from some of the worst slowdown I've seen on the PlayStation 4 to date. Now I've heard the PS3 version of the game ran the same as this one. I've heard conflicting stories about all other versions, however, and have not been able to verify them on my own. Apparently on PC, the frame rate is unlocked, and this issue doesn't exist there at all. But here on the base model PS4, it gets really painful at times. At the worst of times, the slowdown causes my button inputs to drop, and ultimately it kinda ruins the experience. It really sucks to say this and show you guys this footage, because I want to rep this cool battle system, but man, this just cannot be ignored. This isn't a huge problem at the front of the game, but it just gets worse and worse as you go, and it makes it really hard to recommend the game. Now, while we're here talking about performance, let's hit on some other technical aspects of the game. Obviously, the game looks nice enough with its anime style. It's clearly up-resed and the jaggies are rough in places, but overall it hasn't aged too poorly. Characters definitely look the best, with a nice and wide variety of costumes to pick from. Environments, on the other hand, are pretty empty and lackluster. But not only are they empty, there simply aren't many of them. The size of the game's total explorable area is pretty small, and you'll be re-exploring the vast majority of areas several times. The pop-in is also a bit rough. The game offers dual audio, which is nice, but there's a tad bit of a problem here as well. In the options menu, I balanced the audio so that the voice was at max volume. Here's how the game sounds in both languages.
首都であるこのカイロ都市マルガは堅固な城壁のおかげで今のところ安全だが、それに 帝国軍に占領された地域の民はかなり過酷な扱いを受けているとの情報も。
それはわかります。
Harmonics? Is that what you call those instrument weapon things Kirika and Excella were using?
Long ago, the shining dragon inside you gifted them to the ancients so they could protect themselves. There are supposedly 7 harmonic...
As you can see, there's a small problem with the Japanese tracks. The performances in both languages are fine, but in Japanese the recordings are extremely compressed and kind of painful to listen to. The game has 2 difficulties, which is nice. If you find normal too difficult, you can drop it to casual mid-game, but you can't do the reverse. Camera rotation speed is slower than I would like, and there's no option to speed it up. The music in the game is pretty great, in fact. I would say the music is the only uncompromised fantastic part of this game. Where other parts of the game are good or even great, they all tend to have at least one debilitating flaw. The music does not. Hell, even the subtitles and cutscenes are an eyesore, and the way the running works? Holding X while exploring makes you auto-run, but it's kind of like Gears of War. You just jet forward with little control over your ability to turn. When you let go of X, you skid to a halt, and need to come to a full stop before you can start moving again. There's no auto text progression either, which is strange for a game with so much visual novel style content. At the very least, Rinna's really cute. But yeah, this is Shining Resonance Refrain. An okay at best RPG with a generic world, slow story, bland characters, good music, and a great battle system tragically marred by performance issues. There's not much else to say here besides this. Shining Resonance Refrain refrains from resonating shiningly. And that's all there is, folks. Sadly, I'm a bit disappointed in this one. There is so much potential and so much letdown. I wouldn't recommend it at full price, but if you're gonna go out and buy it, keep an eye out for some really good patch notes first. And that's all I'm gonna say on this. If you guys found this video helpful or useful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe. Links to socials are in the description, and as always, folks, thanks for watching. Since we're all here enjoying this clip of my fiancé bottle feeding a calf, I want to give a huge shout out to the folks on Patreon. If it weren't for them, I would not have been able to afford or review this game. So we owe them all of our thanks for this video. Pick a name at random and thank them below if you can.